All right, good morning.
Good evening. Yeah.
Good evening, good afternoon. Actually, good
Well,
early morning for Chris, but he just went to get his coffee.
it's 2 minutes to 8 p.m. That's our. You're there at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll be here at 10 o'clock, at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
Whereas if you're in California at the moment, would be 12 hours of opposite
hmm
until your stupid bit of daylight saving comes on.
yeah.
I've yet to see. I've yet to see any interest coming from these daylight savings. But yeah, I mean, we had even some of the time that I was in the UK, we had, especially summertime as we call it now.
Hmm.
But World War II, we had double daylight saving time. So the farmers got up even earlier.
Oh, wow.
And my dairy farmer friends absolutely hate it because it takes a long time to teach the cows, sorry, I'm coming an hour later.
Well, once,
So
yeah,
they're,
I suppose if you try to vary it during the year,
yeah,
yeah, that's 2 hours is a big difference for cattle.
because of course the the delivery trucks and or the collection trucks all come to human clocks. They
Sure.
don't come to cow clocks.
Right. Okay, there you go.
Also, not quite sure why, but I now see about 3 different versions of the community page.
Oh, do you? Okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah, what one of at least one of which I put something on like the day before or 2 days before last week,
Yeah.
confirming something about the book selections,
Okay.
such that
Hey, Mark.
Chris would never have to quite acknowledge the dictatorial situation. So I've clarified it this time.
The dictatorials.
Uh, so
Yes.
having run a couple of times the last 40 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it was after I had to escape last time,
Yeah.
we don't seem to have decided on a book still.
No, there was a book that
We've just got we've got a shorter shortlist.
that I thought we were very close to, but we didn't really decide on it. So we do need to do that once again this week. I'm just looking. I'm trying. Yeah. So did we? I mean, I see a forum. Were the things lost from the forum? Because I see a kind of a gap between the 5th and the 17th.
Well, annoyingly, I still haven't seemingly quite got the habit of being able to point my copy of Obsidian at what's on Dropbox as opposed to what's on my copy of Dropbox.
Oh,
So that
that would
seems to
that
be
would
part of a problem.
that would cause a mismatch, yeah, for sure.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
so the 23rd of the 9th,
I think the book was the Songlines book. I think was the one that we were closest to kind of a consensus
as
on.
opposed to not the 23rd of the 9th, but the 9th of February.
Yeah, I don't have anything for the 9th of February in the community forum. In
So in chat,
in the chat transcript, yeah, probably that was mentioned.
so I've just dropped it into the chat line.
Okay, thank you.
I think I put it because I couldn't see it again. I think I put it in chat last week anyway. But
I think you did.
didn't see.
I remember you saying that
Yeah.
something
So
about Curtis because I haven't been following Curtis recently, but yeah, and that led to a conversation of the fact that
and
the other guy is back.
the other thing that I thought might pop up in chat not so much the chat, but in the community folder, was particularly with, say, Mark and the let's see what we can do with illicit versus Research Rabbit, or illicit versus Google Scholar, or whatever.
Right.
I dipped back into illicit briefly. It doesn't seem to have shifted much in the last couple of weeks, but it's an older product, slower, and it's a bigger, more academic type audience.
I it's funny.
I've also managed to catch ChatGPT out in some serious lies.
Really?
Particularly where I've given them a name, given them a person, and said, what's their top, and knowing that they've got a cut-off sometime in 2021, they stopped learning. So, as I have said before, if you ask it about COP15, it tells you about Copenhagen back in the 80s, which is fine. There's a limit. We have to work with the limits, right? So I've given it names of people who are still current, but have been in the industry, as it were, 10 plus years. So there's a chunk of stuff that's in pre-21. Please give me Fred's top 10 papers, or top 5 papers, or 5 major points that are attributed to that research. Some of it's science. One of it was a bit more David Graeber type anthropology, history crossover. But it was mainly science. And it said, amongst other things, this person's got paper, title, date, DIO number, the lot. It wasn't as though it was somebody saying, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I've got a watch in my overcoat type lie. So just, okay, fine, I've been recommended 5 papers, let's go look at them. 2 of them don't exist. And so you go back to ChatGPT and say, the paper you told me about doesn't seem to exist. Just give him the title back. Say, this doesn't seem to exist. Oh, sorry, my mistake. And he changes a couple of bits. You go look that one up, doesn't exist either. And it's a wonder when using it rather like, he's not in yet, but Greg said about making tunes and songs 2 meetings ago. It seems to be really good at that sort of thing. But as soon as you want to get it to give you a real concrete fact, it seems to be somewhat variable. And when you confront it with it, some of the time it apologizes profusely, and no matter, unless you've got the jailbreak version, you always get absolute politeness, which coming from the construction industry is quite a luxury. And there are other times when it almost seems to say, well, what did you expect? I'm human after all type is either going to be possibly the next line, or I have a limit, but I can make things up. And it's like, really? I've asked you, it's like, particularly now, for instance, even in the UK, the number of times that newspapers make things up. And then if you're really lucky, we get an apology at like 10 point, page 46 from the page 2 headline or something.
Right.
And that was quite a disappointment because I was quite enjoying using it to say, tell me stuff I don't know. So I could go look. And I'll be honest, I was asking too much. I'd ask for 10 titles. And I go look at maybe the top 2 or 3. It didn't get down to the middle section or the 2/3 of the way down where the errors seem to have.
Right.
So I can see that it would be, in its current form, it would be of use to say, I've written this, take it away, tart it up, tidy it up, be a better editor than I am, rewrite it and give it back to me.
Yeah.
And then it's no longer mine in the normal sense. So I could now see the errors in it or the things that I would do slightly differently that are not necessarily back to where it came from. And so it would be like the third person to look at it would be an improvement, hopefully. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's kind of as you're saying that, Tim. It reminded me of a passage that I really like from Douglas Adams' book, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, where one of the characters says to the protagonist, "What was that Sherlock Holmes principle? Once you've discounted the impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And the main character, Dirk Gently, says, "I reject that entirely. The impossible often has a kind of integrity to it, which the merely improbable lacks. How often have you been presented with an apparently rational explanation of something that works in all respects other than one, which is that it is hopelessly improbable?" Cute puppy. Your instinct is to say, yes, but he or she simply wouldn't do that. Right. And that's the thing I think that the AI is going to have trouble with. Right. Because, it's scraping from sources that it can't make any judgments about the probability of accuracy or any, and also, the thing that seems to me to be the most kind of question about AI is it lacks motivation. So how can it understand, and how can it make judgments about what people may be saying based on their motivations?
If it gets its news feed from certain channels that have people the likes of entertainers of Tucker Carlson, then what do you expect? I agree. However, part of the reason why I deliberately did it that way was these are science papers or they're in proper journals. They're not paid for journals either.
Right.
It's Nature, it's the Lancet, it's the New England Medical and those are so easy to check. And that was the other reason was I don't want something that's going to be really difficult for me to check, because I was going through and this seems to work fine. And as I say, I was biting off too much initially with some of the questions. And then it was like, okay, let's pick this one and really drill down. And one of them was on environmental pollution from titanium oxide. Titanium oxides are used in some instances as a purification, but it's used in a lot of other stuff. So a bit like lead in paint, etc., being a general pollutant and being then used by some people as a bat to beat Hershey chocolate up because they don't list lead as a constituent in their chocolate wrapping, right? When you go back and say, okay, well, how much lead is there in? And it's like, we're like 1/10 of what there is in normal organic carrots. because lead is so pervasive now. We as society have gone into lead mines, taken it out, of this nice enclosed concentrated point, put it into petrol, amongst other things, to spread it around.
Right.
And so it's a worse case type thing than, say, halon and the ozone layer. There is no halon naturally.
Right.
There is plenty of lead.
Right.
I mean, the Romans using it, right? And I can remember when there was still lead pipework in the domestic water in the UK. Right? We took it out of our house. It was about 8 or 9.
Yeah. One of the crazy things about lead is that there's so much talk about lead paint, right, in America today. Oh, we gotta worry about lead paint, and we gotta do lead paint abatement and stuff, and and the little children who are eating the paint chips off the windowsill and all that.
But it's in all the food.
Which is, and I mean, it is a concern, but the thing that caused the lead epidemic was car exhausts, right? Which had raised it up to thousands of times more than the background. Yeah, there is kind of a background level of kind of environmental lead, but it's weird to me. I mean, the only people that I've ever known. I mean, one time, actually, when I was in the insurance business, I had a client who worked. He basically he was self-employed. He had a battery business though, and he could not get insurance just because of his constant contact with lead acid batteries. But that was the only that's the only time I've in my. I mean, I remember leaded gas, but it's been a long time.
But there's a point of where people now picking up, obviously, paint on kids' cribs where they're going to be, invariably they're going to chew at it, or on the kids' top wooden toys, particularly. The painted bricks,
right,
etc. There's clear points of where you don't want to. But it's where else is it generally? I mean, one of the other places that in digging around recently was particularly because of the chocolate example, was 60s, 50s, and 40s. It was in the ink that was on the sweet wrappers. So it's like, particularly if you've got a slow-moving sweet in a mom and pop 7-Eleven corner shop that's not shifting sweets like McDonald's shift burgers,
right?
And the time it takes to absorb is well past, etc. And it's at that point that somebody in talking to somebody else says, yeah, but don't forget they also used to put radium in toothpaste because it made your teeth glow white. And it's like, where's the precautionary principle? We know this kills you, as in, the number of scientists and engineers and technicians that have worked with this crap have been ill, died, etc. And then, so what do? We go put it on toothpaste, of which I'm sure that on average we all ingest about a third of what we every twice a day if you're lucky, 3 times if you're really unlucky. So
it's and then there's and then there are things that we think are stable, right? I mean, isn't that the story of the pipes in Detroit, right? Was that when when they changed the water supply, that was when the lead started to become a problem, because whatever was in the new water was actually reacting with the lead and carrying it with it.
Bristol in the UK is a relatively small but an oddball city. Has 2 supply directions, one from the north, one from the south. But it happens that on one of the projects I was on, I ended up by staying on a bit longer than common for construction.
Supposed to be doing that.
And I'm not a swimming pool person by any means, but I've done a number of pools,
Hmm.
some big, some small, some Olympic size. And he was driving me crazy trying to set this one up to be stable. And then the manager from the pool we were replacing, who was like 2 miles up the road, closed that one, came over and says, yeah, it's Bristol water. So I said, what do you mean Bristol water? They give it, they give decent drinking water. It's the UK for Christ's sakes, right? He says, yeah, but they have two sources. One's alkaline, one's acidic.
Oh,
When they switch over, they don't tell you. All the treatment you do in a pool resumes.
sure.
It's one or the other. Not
Sure.
both.
I remember testing my backyard swimming pool for pH. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
So
Oh.
anyway,
Yeah.
what I was trying to lead on to was why is Silent Spring not further up? It's 60 years this year. Says dictator.
Mm-hmm. So we have, so we have some stuff to talk about, I think, in the last section of Graeber, or at least it seemed more. Last week, it may have just been, the week I had, but I wasn't as enthusiastic about the stuff that we had read. And this time, actually, I am. I sat with it again this morning, and I made some notes, and I highlighted, and I liked kind of what he. I guess maybe part of it was it's like going to a new movie that you've heard a lot about. There's a set of expectations that can really ruin it for you if it's been oversold, or if it's been presented as it's going to be something and it turns out to be something different. This I actually liked quite a bit because it seemed much more sort of low key, and actually the biggest moment that I had in this section was kind of in a footnote when he was talking about sort of the debate. It was this long footnote where he's talking about the debate over the parentage of the main character, right? And he says, well, he said if I were forced to choose, I would choose the guy that we've been hearing about the whole time, which I thought was a little bit interesting. But then also he said, but why choose? Because, it's this one, Retzi Malaho's father. It's on page 98. And he says, I would suggest Nathaniel North, and that gave me even more interested in Nathaniel North. But then the second half of it is even more interesting because he says, why even choose? Why does the father of this significant person have to be a significant person? Right. That's just a cultural expectation that we seem to have, right? That why
part of the great man theory.
Yeah, it's totally, great men have to come from great men, right? And not from great women, but just from a lineage of great men. And then he sort of points out that it's really about the story that he's telling about the pirates, right? As well, that they pretend to be tyranny on, and everyone must fear the pirate captain, right? But behind the scenes on board, it's much more egalitarian, and it doesn't matter, because everybody's getting an equal share of the booty. So, so why would we assume that somebody who was just a crewman on Nathaniel North's ship or in his onshore pirate community not have had the means and the interest in educating his children and and providing them with these ideas that they can then take forward and all that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting moment because it got me thinking about the whole question of being a name versus sort of being anonymous and just kind of operating behind the scenes and without the spotlight and off the grid and all of that.
Well, and then 100 years later in Robert Louis Stevenson, you have the orphan on the pirate ship now too, which is the polar opposite of someone with parentage to kind of push And he's getting, I think, maybe a slightly different type of education there.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought yeah, that whole element of it was very interesting. I thought that it did a good this time, I paid more attention to, do I think that he's doing what a professional historian would consider adequate for for dealing with sources and interpreting sources and stuff. And I kind of really did think that he was. I think it's
What
interesting
about
that he. Go ahead.
what about from the perspective of an anthropologist?
I don't know as much about anthropologists and the standards of their work. I think that probably he's an overachiever amongst anthropologists because he actually does use evidence, which, I mean, even even Luhmann, I think that's the thing that always kind of bugs me about that. All of the, I guess, economics, sociology, anthropology, all these theory first kind of disciplines, I think, are in danger of leaning too far into the theory and using and falling victim to confirmation bias or whatever you want to call it.
Just having examples is not evidence of or proof of a thing. It's leaning. And in fact, I was listening to some and looking at some stuff on mythology and theories of mythology in the 19th and 20th centuries. And that's one of the big criticisms is you can come up with bits of evidence of these things along the way, but the fact that there's evidence of something doesn't prove, in fact, that it's a causal thing.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of evidence to support some of your theories. So and I'm listening to chunks of it. A lot of it is theory about theory for theory's sake. And given context I have of other cultures that are extant today, I know for a fact that they're making it up as they go along almost.
Yeah.
And it's like, these theories
right.
of Freud and Malinowski, and Malinowski at least has some evidence from the Trobriand Islands that he was living in and amongst during World War II. But no, it's like, how much did you really absorb?
Yeah.
I
really.
No, go ahead.
I really enjoyed that was a moment, you mentioned living amongst them. The couple of echoes of Graeber's time in Madagascar really I thought were really resonant and really fun, because when he's talking sort of about towards the end, he's talking about sexual attraction and conversation, right? And how conversation, having a relationship that is about having these quality conversations is such a large thing. I thought that was a little bit charming, that is, because then his whole thing at the end is really kind of his so what statement is, conversation is the thing that we need. So that struck me as kind of interesting. On 91, I also marked a part where he talks about how Mayur was talking about Ratsumalaho on the previous page, and then he kind of continues and he says, language like this, however superficially neutral, is in fact virtually the only way it is possible to look at a situation where a group of human beings meeting in public assemblies comes up with a way to fend off slave traders while still maintaining a decentralized and participatory system of self-government. and not see it as a great historical achievement. I thought that was an interesting moment too, right? Because the implication that I took from that is, yeah, you can't really not see that as a historical achievement unless that's your goal in the first place, right? To avoid, kind of seeing some of these things. So, yeah.
I read that and thought, 250 years from now, anthropologists and sociologists are going to look back on the Gilmore Girls and how the government was run on that fictional TV show, and that's going to be how they think all this came about, because after the Armageddon, there's not going to be much left besides that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting to try to make some generalizations based on that, on a incomplete record that that wasn't meant to be about that in the first place. So yeah, that's a thing too. And I like that. I like the idea that there's something going on in the sources, where the people who are, he sort of says, well, okay, Mayur is off base, but he's also unable to kind of see through the fiction that he's being told, right? Which is part of this tradition. He mentions at one point the sort of the habitual the habit of Malagasy people not to, especially the elders, right, not to inflate their own their own actions and achievements, right, and to kind of keep themselves out of the spotlight, and how in searching for this heroic story with with sort of clear good guys and bad guys, he misses that. And then also just this idea that if they're doing this same thing in their society that the pirates were doing of creating an image of a strong state in the ways that the outside world will consider it to be a strong state, right, then that doesn't necessarily mean that they're internally committed to actually acting on this idea of central authority and all of that. They're just projecting it outwards because they know that people coming along in ships, or if they hear about that, they're going to say, oh, okay, maybe we better not mess with these guys.
Well, it also kind of underlines the difference of, in a smaller group society, you don't have to brag about the things you did necessarily, because the people around you see you and were present and were there and saw it and know or know better.
Right.
Versus the stories that get told outside of the society can be totally made up lies, and they'll be bought because they're not there to see and have the understanding. And to some extent, we have even though we have more communication now, we in some sense have less, because our politicians will sit around and say, my favorite one this week is we need to not increase the debt limit because of, it's like every house in America has to balance their budget, and you can't have more outflow than income. And because of that reason, so the US government needs to do the same exact thing. Well, it's a nice story to tell for people who are too busy to look at the realities of what's going on.
Right.
But the US government has way more leverage and tools at their disposal to deal with their budgeting issues than my tiny little household does at a fraction of the budget size.
Right.
They have levers that I couldn't possibly ever have. So they're working in a whole different universe, but it's an easy story to say.
Right.
And then
to say that's a myth that's gone, throughout the history of economics, right? That there is some type of a relationship between the way societies and states work and household economy.
Yeah, and it's, for the part of the society that's not able to put the mind share to understanding the complexities and the differences of what those two things are, the model seems simple and it's easy to understand. So yeah, we should do that. But if you're actually in the society and you know better, like, it's a lie. So are we going to be the British government in the 1700s trusting what the pirates say, or are we going to look at what our own little community is actually doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I did. I'm kind of scrolling. I was going to say scrolling forward. I'm paging forward. I'm flipping through the pages and looking at my notes, which I guess is the equivalent of scrolling forward. And
the scrolling metaphor has reached peak.
Apparently, it has. Yeah. I liked.
I'm scrolling through my book too.
Yeah, the thing that, I mean, some of the things that kind of jumped out at me were this the oath taking and and actually that part was just it was colorful enough and interesting enough the way he described it, to not that I was sort of expecting, like, oh, okay, he's going to lose me here, because I'm not really that interested in, oath taking in Madagascar, but it worked. So I guess that shows the quality of his editor. But yeah, these oath-taking rituals and this this sort of long negotiation with the Malata and the Betsimisaraka. I guess there's an extra syllable in there that I wasn't going to put in. That I thought was kind of interesting. It's not as somehow it's not as relevant to me, or not as problematic to me, that it's it's almost kind of, to me, it reminds me of the last song in the musical Camelot, right, where it's sort of like, for one brief shining moment, right, that this sort of dynamic relationship existed, and then he didn't his end doesn't seem to have been that heroic, and the things, and afterwards things changed, but again, maybe that's too much emphasis put on the individual, even by Graeber in his story. The idea that he was negotiating with with the pirates and their and the women, while in this whole period, was kind of interesting. I don't know, I think there were probably some things in there that it kind of also struck me that, and I've been thinking about this, I guess, since we started reading this, that really a map that sort of foregrounds or highlights the ocean and the connections over water, and and gives less attention to the land masses, might really be interesting to think about this, to build a history of this period around around nautical maps. And it's kind of interesting too, because all the nautical maps of this period are navigational maps, right? And that's why they have all of those different all the different lines that they're drawing, and the different angles of connecting point to point, and all of that. It's interesting in cartography as well.
Well, it seems interesting to have that framing, because that was also the emerging technology of the time for communication and, you know, transport and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you equate that to modern life, it's now all about the connectedness of the cell phone and social, always on instantaneous social media becomes then the lens through which you will look back 300 or 400 years from now and say, what was the effect on the culture of this new technology? Because it's also the other kind of weird piece here that I have to remind myself always is they didn't have television, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have, you know, so communication was a slow plodding, and ships and the movement of ships also was the movement of knowledge and information, not just goods and services going across boundaries.
Right.
Um,
Right. And
so we you know, we take globalization for granted now, but
Mhm. Yeah, I think that movement of ideas, and he kind of alludes to that at the end, that he said, he says, well, we can't know for sure that the people over here knew what was going on over here, but it seems very, very likely that they did, and so I think this was, sort of the same thing that led to, Graeber and Wengro, talking about this, the indigenous critique and all of that, how that finds its way.
In a modern framing, you have the official channels of governments and industries, but you have this little pirate encampment on the side of Madagascar that's acting as the equivalent of their version of Reddit,
Yeah,
maybe Twitter, and it becomes a hub because there are people moving in and out who have ready access to both some knowledge as well as, travel and interaction with people in different places.
Right. Well, and then on 134, he actually uses the term schismogenesis, right? So that I thought that was kind of a nice, for us, a callback to Dawn of Everything, but I guess for him, kind of probably a call forward or sideways. But that idea that, the pirates certainly, I've got to imagine, were self-conscious enough to understand themselves as people standing outside, and having a critical relationship with the societies that they've largely escaped. Right. So the European hierarchical societies. So that's kind of interesting. On the technology note, I'm not wearing my Apple Watch anymore. I have actually purchased a pocket watch, and that I'm keeping in my pockets, and I'm not using. I have my cell phone's in my pocket still, but I'm not using all those apps that I was using to track my steps and my sleep and my eating and my, just fasting and all these things, because it occurred to me, and it's been kind of driven home to me in recent weeks as I've stepped on the scale, that it hasn't been doing me any good. So I've gone back to the little red book, and writing stuff down, and writing, how I'm feeling, and writing what I'm doing, and so that's kind of going to be an experiment. I also, just to kind of double down on that, canceled all my Amazon subscriptions to all that subscribe and save stuff. Which I had really, that had exploded during COVID, right? Because it was so great just to have the UPS guy come to the door and, and bring us the toilet paper and the cat food and, all that stuff. I was getting, I was even getting decks, it got so extreme. I was getting decks of cards, right? And toothpaste and just and dozens of things that I was getting every so often. Kitchen sponges and just all kinds of stupid stuff. And so so this week, what happened was I got the big heavy things. I get like 80 cans of cat food, two of those boxes of 40, because we have so many cats, and we still use them before the next batch comes the following month. But they were beat to hell, and they were in this box that was just taped every way, and it was a real pain in the neck, kind of cutting it open. And then the other one, and then the other thing that came, it was sort of busted, and because it was packed in a box that was too big, and I just thought, so I was a little bit slightly annoyed with that, but then I got an email saying your other packages were undeliverable. So all the other, dozen other things that I was supposed to be getting with that, with that shipment weren't coming, and they were going to, in 3 to 5 days, I'll get a refund, which I don't really, I'm not as concerned about. But I just thought, if you guys can't be bothered to actually get this right, and it probably has to do with, the brutality of whatever warehouse that it's in, that people are just doing what they have to do in the seconds that are allotted them to do it. I just thought, I could drive 5 minutes from here to Target and sit in my car, and somebody will bring me the toilet paper and stick it in my trunk. And in that case, my son had that job, and he was getting $15 an hour. He didn't really like the job that much, but he was getting $15 an hour, and and it was putting money into the local economy. So,
have you become a Luddite teen and flipped back to the flip phone?
Yeah, that's sort of the thing. Yeah, it's kind of weird. That's an issue. I didn't realize the New York Times had written about that. That's cool. Oh, they won't let me see it because I haven't paid them.
I've been seeing a number of you're amongst the number of, I don't know, probably 10 other guys roughly our age and era who have gotten rid of their smartphone and gone back and kind of, it's the pendulum swinging with the, and particularly an age where surveillance capitalism is the thing.
Right.
It's a whole lot easier to say, what, you can't collect all my data because I'm not going to give it to you.
Right.
And the added bonus is I save 4 ounces of the smartwatch and, another 4 ounces of the phone.
Right.
But when I step on the scale, I've now lost almost a pound.
There you go. And the dent that it was making in my wrist, and just it was crazy. Yeah, I thought I couldn't. I can't go on a walk. It's like I can't go on a walk without my watch. It's like I know how long the road is. I know how long that loop is. It's 5.25 miles, and so I can do it without. I can still. I could still bring my phone and listen to an audiobook, right, without having to have it playing through my watch. And yeah, it's just, the flip phone, my favorite phone was the Razor back in the day. And that's a very tempting. Yeah.
Well, I still miss the Motorola StarTAC.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I think about the time that I spend staring at that and how easy it is to get sort of sucked into, flipping to the next YouTube short and the next and the next and the next. And then, oh, holy shit, a half hour's gone. And what did I?
You're so much better off having conversations about freedom and equality. And now you've got the time for it.
Or petting the cat, telling the cat about freedom and equality. They don't care. But yeah, no, it's kind of funny because we're getting, I don't know what it is, maybe it just is sort of peak technology and saturation has caused, because I mean, I've always been sort of a lover of the latest shiny gadget. um I mean, always. So yeah, so this is, it's kind of weird. I don't know if
Just
it's,
how much of your life is tracked by the Apple Watch and by the cell phone is being illustrated in the current Murdoch murder trial,
mm,
where they have presented these timelines and showing exactly what the son's phone was doing, the mother's phone was doing, the father's phone was doing, the OnStar tracking on the car he was driving, and they put together this almost minute by minute timeline of what was happening to these people
mhm.
during this very traumatic time of two of them being blown apart by an AR-15 and a shotgun.
Yeah, yeah. It's, yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I do, I sort of vaguely remember, before this really took off, um, that Enemy of the State movie, right? That Will Smith movie with Gene Hackman, wearing the baseball cap saying they can't see me from space if I got my, this build cap on. Um, and thinking about, and I did actually, when I moved up here to northern Minnesota, one of the things that that I was interested in and that sort of impressed me was that there wasn't a camera on the, on every telephone pole and on the, on the corner of every building. And there certainly are some in the town, especially on my campus, but nowhere near as many as.
Well, if you want some real fun, you should go back and watch the, was that, I think 1972-73 movie, The Conversation, which also had Gene Hackman.
Mm-hmm.
So go back and watch that as a double header with Enemy of the State. And there's a lot of similarities between the two, but I think we're due for yet another version of that thing that throws some surveillance capitalism on top of it all.
Yeah.
And have a whole trilogy of
yeah.
We're watching you.
Is Hackman still alive? That would be, yeah. That
if you come up with his $5 million quote, he will show up.
That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, I mean, it would be, it actually probably is an ideal moment for somebody to oh God, Tim, you directed us to Facebook. I'm resisting.
Well, somebody said surveillance capitalism, so it was bound to happen.
Yeah. Well, what I was gonna say, I was gonna click on that thing because I was thinking, okay, I don't know what Simon Sinek said about phones, but it would be a very opportune moment for somebody to actually produce a flip phone without a camera, without a an external microphone.
There is one, and the people are making like little brick-looking phones with e-ink screens. I want to say Pine, but I may be wrong. Pine phone, maybe. But there's at least one, if not two, phones that are like bare bones, no emails, no notifications. It's just a phone. And maybe if you want to read an ebook on it, you could do that. And it's got a basic calendar, I think, and a to-do list, but super bare bones.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that it would seem like that would be that. Yeah, it's still got a screen though. I mean, even a flip phone, an actual. I mean, a Luddite phone. They could even call it that. I think they'd attract a huge market. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because I am doing all of this stuff on sort of on the air, in the ways that, that I, not only am allowing, but hoping that people will, kind of watch, right? I'm doing, I'm putting this stuff on YouTube, or, I'm putting, daily posts of my primary sources up, with me reading the passages and all of that. But I've been trying to avoid kind of the news feeds, because it just gets, every time I kind of go back and dip back in, it's just crazier and scarier, and especially, I guess, I'm especially nervous since the Seymour Hersh thing dropped, with the Nord Stream, and because that would legitimately be an act of war, I think.
Mm.
And if, and I guess, the expectation was that we would be able to, to skate past it, in some type of combination of nobody wanting to look, and plausible deniability. And also I thought it was brilliant that they sucked up the news cycle and all of the oxygen in the room with the ridiculous claim that Russia had done it themselves. So I think that's, I kind of, as I'm doing all this primary source stuff, and I'm kind of thinking, well, this is a way that, that I can help students sort of understand how we got here, and then I see something like that and I think, I just wasted my time. So it has been interesting. I started just in looking at, kind of crazy networks of, using tools, and actually to change the subject, because that's not, I don't know, it's not that useful, kind of dwelling on that. I have been using Scrintl to do a little network web drawing of, I play with my stack of cards. Nervous, Freudian tick.
Well, it's underlined by talking about Luddism and going back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's kind of ironic that all this stuff happens at the same time. Although I've also been avoiding Reddit actually this week, because the Antinet Reddit kind of exploded, and I didn't want to have to think about that either. But that'll work itself out in time. So
well, have you noticed? And it seems there have been accusations not only on that channel, but the main Zettelkasten channel, that people are creating fake identities to promote things.
I didn't see that, no.
And that happened, I don't know, a week or two ago. One of the moderators put up a post saying, hey, don't do this, no self-promotion, no X, Y, and Z.
Wow.
Which is, I think, part of some of the other stuff that's going on. The subtle stuff under the undercurrents, let's say.
Yeah. Well, it's it was a problematic marketing plan to bash people who are trying to earn a living by becoming gurus, and then try to set yourself up as a guru. But enough said about that.
Who knew note taking could be so contentious?
Yes. But I have been enjoying using, actually, and I got my students on, I got 5 students in this upper level class where they're actually sort of helping me to write the framing stuff around my primary sources. So a little bit of a kind of contextualizing historical paragraph, and then questions, and what themes does this have in common with other things that we've read this week, or that sort of thing. And so I've got 5 of them, and I've gotten them all access to Scrintl, and there were some hiccups in that, because the version that I was using didn't actually work when I did the share thing with them, and so I got with the technical people, and they fixed that for me. Or maybe just they've been updating. Have you noticed there were like 5 updates in a day this week? I don't know, I think it was Thursday or Friday. Every time I opened it or looked back at it, it was like, there's a new version that you can. So they've been working hard, but they wanted to get on a Zoom call with me, and I got on Zoom, and I thought I was going to be talking to this to one of their technical guys, and it was their technical guy and Eke, the CEO, and she was like super interested in kind of what I was doing, and so that was kind of fun.
If it works for Dan, it'll work for all of us.
Well, and so yeah, and I'm not sure, and I think the indication, or the implication, I guess, of that was that probably what that suggests is that not that many people yet are, probably a lot of people are publishing their boards out, but not a lot of people, aside from the actual insiders on the Scrintl team, are sharing boards. And so how's that going to work, as a shared medium, and how much of that, again, that's a space that overlaps with other things that do that, do scheduling and Kanban and communication and all that stuff, probably in, that they don't, that's not their core business. And so I've been, and the thing that I like about them is they seem to do a pretty good job sticking to their knitting. But yeah, I've
So
been.
have you gone full Robin DeRosa in your kind of textbook making project with your students?
I'm trying to, yeah. And she did that so long ago. Oh my God, she was so far ahead of that curve.
And did it old school,
Yeah.
with no tools at all to.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's hard to watch and see what's going on, although he drops hints every now and then. But
Cal historian.
Sean Graham, electroarchaeology, is running a class this. I'm not sure if it's a quarter or semester for him, but he's an anthropologist doing a class on like digital history.
Oh, cool.
He's got a group of students who have all installed and set up Obsidian, and they're dumping their notes into, and they've got it linked up with GitHub to create a kind of a digital memex online of what they're doing. And I thought he had instructions up before the holidays, and I thought students were going to show up on day 1 or 2, and after the first week they'd be on their way and going. And they're now 2 or 3 weeks in, and I think he's finally got the technical hurdles ironed out. So people are starting to put things up. I haven't seen actual content, but I'm following his kind of Mastodon feed of
cool
using some of these tools and techniques in a class setting. It's, it seems like a lot more heartbreak than I would have expected, given what looks like a simple recipe. But my technology hurdles and your technology hurdles are definitely not young student starting out technology hurdles. So
right. Yeah. I think it is interesting to. I've been, it's kind of funny because I've got students doing projects, and and the system that I'm working in is very committed to Microsoft and Teams and SharePoint and and all of that. And so which it's kind of weird. I always, when I was in the computer business, Microsoft was the enemy. But it was, that was really, I guess, I was getting out of it as Google was really kind of becoming what it is now. And, so now I've had a student, I've had a couple of students. I said, well, we should create a shared doc. And they're like, yeah, how about Google Docs? I'm like, I don't want to do it in Google Docs. It's just, I don't, what about Google Scholar? It's like, no, I don't really want to,
Here's my deck of index cards. Take them home tonight. Make your notes.
right.
Send them back to me.
Yeah. Or something, or something at least where, where I own the data. I think that's, and that's the only, I'm loving Scrintl, but that's the one flaw, right? Is that it isn't a, it lives out there it lives in Dublin, apparently. I asked a question and Eke thought I was asking, I said, where's the data? I asked her so where's the data? If I'm sharing, these boards, and I've got some cards and my students have got some cards. And I guess she was thinking, where's the server? And so she says, yeah, they're all in Dublin, because we wanted to be, in the EU and, and be governed by those privacy standards and all that. But
I do remember reading that Frederick Paxson he was a historian, and he actively had and used his card index in his class with his students, and encouraged students, I think, to submit facts and evidence that he would then file away into his.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Which, if you want to like have your own big Zettelkasten, and there's no better way to do it than to have dozens of students submitting to it along the way.
Right. As long as somebody is coordinating the numbering. Yeah, I actually do go into class now with cards, and and I've been doing sort of. I still use PowerPoint, but I've been going in with with notes on cards and just kind of showing them that this is what cards are for. The other. Go ahead.
Your modern day Roland Barthes.
Yeah, it's weird because I'm the other project that I'm doing. I went actually to this. I'm co-teaching an economic history class this semester, and so I went in and we were talking about the creation of the Federal Reserve, right? So we went back to the panic of 1907 and how J.P. Morgan comes back from vacation and in October and kind of sits in his library and people come to him and he does this this thing and he bails out the government and the city of New York to the tune of 30 million, and which makes him kind of a hero, but also scary as hell, right? Because what happens? He's already old. I mean, he dies in 1913, right when the Federal Reserve is coming on. So in that period between the panic and his death, in that about 5-year period, they start to realize that, that something needs to be set up. But as I was doing that, I was making a list of, okay, so who goes to the Jekyll Island meeting? Right. And who, and I write this list, and then I'm thinking, okay, so who is that person? Well, Nelson Aldrich, he's a senator, and this one guy's his secretary, and this other guy's the assistant secretary of the Treasury. And then there's
you know what Nelson Aldrich's middle name was, right?
Mm-mm.
Rockefeller.
Oh, was it? Okay.
The two families married and created a wealth empire.
Well, okay, so that, which actually leads me exactly where I was going. So what I did was I went back to Ferdinand Lundberg's book, America's 60 Families, right? And then I started pulling out names and I started putting them on a Scrintl board, and and connecting them. And, so I've got this new board that I call Gilded Age. Right, which I'm just kind of starting out with, and I'm thinking all the connections and all the so it's just, like I think Henry Davison is at this meeting too. Thomas Lamont is not, but Thomas Lamont is already a member of the Jekyll Island Club. And so all these connections. It's sort of weird. I was, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just too kind of focused, because it's ironic, because I really like this idea that, that he came up with, that, that it's these people who aren't, who cares who his father was, Ratsumalaho's father, right? Because, any one of this, because the point was that this was an egalitarian society, where any of the, of the people on the ship, or any of the people in the onshore community, could have equally been. And yet, I do think this is ironic. I am still I'm curious about, this connection, and along the way I find this Franklin Delano, right? Oh, I found a list. I found a book published in 1846 or 47 of New York City's richest people, everybody with more than $100,000. And I kind of went and it was on archive.org. So I just paged through it, and, anybody over $1 million, I kind of took note of them and said, okay, who's that? And there was this guy, Franklin Delano. Well, he's the guy that Franklin Delano Roosevelt is named after, because he's like a great uncle through the mother, right? And it's like they're all connected, and this idea that, that we are, we're a culture, that America is a society and a culture on, on self-made men, coming from nothing, and, and it's problematic. And I'm not sure that I would be doing, I'm not sure that I would be doing the world a service to create a network analysis of American
but
history.
That kind of self-made business, at the same time you're getting with the popular series of kids books,
Horatio Alger.
Horatio Alger, with that same kind of story, and it becomes the mythos of America, that we have all this self-made nonsense that everybody still wants to believe,
right?
And then now people use the word meritocracy as a serious word, rather than a total. The book where it originated, it was totally an ironic use.
Right. But we think of it completely unironically now. Right. Yeah.
Now it's serious. It's part of that, the Alger stories,
right. Yeah. There's a book called The Sun Also Rises, SON. And let me just see. It is by, I guess it's not showing up it's in my library. I think it's in my Kindle library, but it's not showing up right now. But in any case, it's this book called The Sun Also Rises, and it's about mostly inherited wealth, but also inherited social status, inherited educational, kind of credentials and stuff. So yeah, I think all that is kind of all that interests me a lot. And I think so. What I started to do is I started to create this little network analysis, making a card for, all these different things. And it's kind of weird, the rabbit holes that will take you down, and the first one was, how JP Morgan and Company connects with all the other banks in New York, and then also connects with the railroad companies and with Anaconda Copper, right? And all of that, and that is it's weird. When I was in the first time I was in grad school in doing Latin American history, I ran across there's a guy named Murray Zeitlin who did that kind of network analysis of the society and the elite basically in Chilean history, right? Because Chile was so much smaller that it was easy to do, and it just was very attractive to me, the way that kind of explained things, right? And the way that it was easier to understand, why people reacted to other people in politics the way they did when you knew their family history, 5 generations back. And I actually wrote to him and I said, has anybody done this for America? And thank you. Yeah, that's the one. Greg Clark. And he said, no, nobody has. I mean, Domhoff has done something like that in Seattle or wherever he is with, who rules America, but not to the point of actually kind of naming names. And it was really only, it was only a brief little moment kind of in America, in the trajectory of the muckrakers, when people like Louis Brandeis and Ferdinand Lundberg and people like that were actually naming names, and partially that came from the fact that the Pujo committee and and Brandeis's own kind of investigations, and all that was happening in the 20s and 30s. And in 1924, I think it was 24 or 25, but it only happened for 1 year. For 1 year, they published people's income tax returns. And so everybody knew. So journalists had actual access, numerical access to how much people were being taxed. And they made, lists, and they did investigative reporting on, all the people who were being taxed, and all the people who were, they expected to be taxed, who weren't taxed, and why weren't they, and all that. And then there was so much journalism done about that they changed the law, and that was the last time that happened. So,
at least
anyway,
until 3 years ago.
Yeah.
If the New York Times is tickled enough, they'll go track down documents and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there was actually just a list of all the names on it. I mean, what a treasure trove, right? Just all in one place. But to go back to sort of, I've taken this on a weird tangent now, so to probably go back to the other thing that we had in front of us, which was, what are we going to read next?
Oh.
I think the thing that we seem to be closest to agreement on that is actually out right now was the Margot Neal Lynn Kelly Songlines book. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that was the one. There's a couple in there. We were just waiting for the benevolent dictator to put an imprimatur on it.
Yeah, Tim had declined to do that. So, yeah, I like the idea of Myth America. Is it actually out yet? And I like the idea of Songlines. Either one would work for me.
Myth America was the longer one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Myth America was the one that we would probably have to take longer, because it does look like it deals. It's like 24 chapters that are all probably things we'd want to take individually. So I don't know that we want to spend a half a year working on this.
Yeah, I looked it up. I don't know if it's out. So I looked it up to look at the chapter titles again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. Yeah, I think it looks like it is out.
Okay.
Came out in 20. Yeah, it's in 20. Came out in 22. So
January 3rd.
Yeah, there are 20 chapters. I wonder if it's possible to take a few at a time.
Well, we could vote on which chapters we want to cover.
We could do that too.
And since they're kind of independent subjects.
Right, because they each have their own authors. Yeah.
I would like to read Myth America. I've started reading it.
Okay. All right, why don't we do that then? And now looking at the I guess I'm looking at the Kindle. Let me switch over to the hardcover so I can see pages.
Oh, myth. Is that a Muppet skit?
Maybe. If we did, it's about 300 pages long. We did we did it over 5 weeks. We would be doing about 4 chapters per week if we really did the chapters. I think probably this would be one where it would make sense to maybe actually use Obsidian a little bit more and kind of mention some things. If for example, if we were reading the if we're reading like the first 4 chapters of it, it goes from American exceptionalism to founding myths, to vanishing Indians, and immigration. So I can imagine, and they're all short, so they're all just kind of little, I guess I got to imagine, a couple thousand words each. But it would probably, make sense to, I'm thinking, I would probably like get on Obsidian and say, okay, these are the things that jumped out at me, and then we'd be a little bit more kind of prepared rather than kind of bouncing back and forth from one thing to another. We'd maybe have a little bit more consensus about what sort of resonated with people. That sound like it would work? Okay.
That's workable. And there's enough different topics. You're bound to find something.
Yeah.
I
agree. Yeah.
A book of blog posts.
Right. Right. Well, and that was the thing, when we were doing like poorly understood, it was sort of like, okay, it's more evidence supporting the same argument, and I got to a point of sort of saturation after a while, where it was like, okay, I get it. This at least will give us some different some different voices and some different topics to see if they really kind of fit together in the way that the book suggests that they do.
Okay, I just hit purchase.
All right, cool. I will.
Hey Dan, how does the participation, the audience change? Do you send out like an email to all the people in your
Yes,
who've participated in the past to say, okay, we're going to read this book, so
yep.
If you're interested, start showing up? Or
Right, yeah. I think that's what I have done the last. I guess I've probably done it every single time. Yeah, I've sent out. I have this mailing list of everybody who has ever sort of expressed interest, and I say, okay, this is the next thing we're going to do, yeah, and I think that's how we got Nate back, actually. So, and there have been a couple of people. There were a couple of people actually that And every once in a while, I'll, when I put these things on YouTube, I'll get somebody who says, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Can I do it?" And and I typically say, "Yeah, sure," and I send them information, and sometimes they come, and sometimes they don't. That was how Stephanie came for the AntiNet thing. So,
And then 4 weeks in, you're stuck with Chris and Mark and Patrick and Tim.
the core. Yeah, and John usually. Yeah.
I just like having something to do on Saturday mornings. This book was the biggest stretch for my.
Yeah. Well,
I describe it to my wife like she watches a lot of these serialized things on television, and
mhm.
I'll show up every other week or so and never can kind of keep the characters straight. So I keep asking questions, and she gets so annoyed. It's like you either participate or you don't.
Yeah. This one, it's kind of funny because I've sort of run out of things. Oh, actually, I did hear there's something coming back for a second season that I liked the first season of, and I didn't think they would ever make another season of it. It's got Orlando Bloom, and it's about Victorian London and fairies. Right. So there are, so there's sort of like the dark satanic mills and dark, the dark, smoggy London, and elves and other, mythical creatures exist as well. So it's kind of, it's sort of not, I guess, unlike the premise of the Witcher series, but without all of the swords and stuff. Because it takes place in the 19th century. But yeah, it's kind of funny. This one did remind me quite a bit of Black Sails. And I did like that. And I like the fact that Black Sails sort of took a little bit of history and a little bit of Robert Louis Stevenson and jammed them together. I don't know, LinkedIn is always suggesting things to me, and it suggested to me recently that I follow a guy who said some interesting things, and I think his web, and I think he's a Minnesota guy, and I think his website is about historical fiction, and and doing stuff that's very adjacent to history, and that and that is set in a kind of in a historically more or less accurate kind of story world. So that interests me a little bit. And that, and legitimate historians, did that for a while and called it, counterfactual history or that sort of thing. So
that how we ended up in this misinformation world, is people are reading that stuff as fact now?
Yeah, probably. Well, and the thing is, it's so easy in history. It's so easy to cherry pick. Right. So you can have somebody like, I don't know if I mentioned before, but a few years ago, a decade or so ago, I sort of tried to commit myself to reacting to, sort of very conservative, like, even before Bill O'Reilly, right? The other guy, Glenn Beck, had a partner, and he was writing histories, and he was, and it was this very, very revolution era, kind of liberty, and all the big capital letterized words, and with sort of anecdotes, but they were sort of mythical, fabulous anecdotes on the level of Paul Revere's Ride kind of thing, of these heroic individuals and stuff. Yeah, exactly. So Tim, closing thoughts on all the books. We did actually, and now that I think of it, Chris, the Songlines book was your pitch for a non dead white European male author, right?
Yeah, and so here we have Kevin Cruz.
Yeah, sorry.
I thought, and Julian, too.
And Julian,
They're-
who I assume is
say-
also a dude.
Yeah, I had to look it up. I thought I remembered the name Julie, and I was like, well, maybe it's a capitulation. No,
Yep.
it's not.
Yep. Oh, is there a book series that's behind House of Cards?
Yeah.
Oh.
Andrew, I'm trying to remember his name. It was like the late 80s, early 90s.
Mm.
And the British version, I think, is more interesting than the American one. Although the American one is like super interesting now, even in retrospect, with what's happened to why it's not on anymore.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Talk about life imitating art, imitating life.
Hmm.
Oh. So, although apparently Spacey's trying to make a comeback.
Of course.
And, well, apparently he was so inspired by Cosby and Louis C.K. that he decided it was his moment.
Character actors gone wrong.
Yep. It sort of makes you rethink some of the roles though, like L.A. Confidential, just some of these, and even the character that he plays in Glengarry Glen Ross. All right, yeah, Tim, you're going. See you midweek in the vault. Yeah, we've this is probably a good one to call it at 90 minutes because we're off on tangents, which we were. I'm sorry about that. Much of the day.
It's always tangents.
Yeah. Tangents are where the action is a lot of the time.
To give you an indication of how meaty the thing was on the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a
Yeah, I liked
heavy
the last bit of it, but yeah, I did like the last bit of it, and I especially like that that kind of it could be anyone thing, the whole parentage issue.
The middle wasn't as dark as Empire Strikes Back, but the ending was not the big crescendo that Return of the Jedi was either. So,
all right. I suppose. Yeah.
Second acts are tough. Third acts are even harder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely didn't apply the story grid.
But he did slip in schismogenesis, so we're all happy.
He snuck that in, yeah. So he's all, yeah. And I do actually. I mean, I really like Graeber. I really liked. I liked this. I especially, I was reading or I was listening to kind of off and on Utopia of Rules. I like his stuff. I mean, I think that this was kind of this one was kind of a modest, much more modest kind of an approach that he took, but probably will be a kind of it'll have more legs, maybe than some of the stuff that he did that was more kind of.
It's got pirates, so there's that.
It's got pirates, yeah.
Got pirates.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. I've started into debt, and it's not as dense as debt was, but
right.
Yep. Well, I guess when you go back to your own old history from when you were a student, and you unearth that thing, let's finally get this done and published and out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And even more so that it relates to what I'm still hoping is the second and third books of his series with Wengrow, because I totally want to read those, whatever those next two are. Yeah. If there's a bigger thesis hiding amidst all the pages.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me, is that this is a global. I mean, even the pirates, right, are in the Indian Ocean, and the pirates of the Caribbean end up over, Captain Avery, right? All these people are, they're over there, and that is, just sort of opening up that, and doing that, map of the oceans and that kind of look, because there are people who have done, I mean, Bernard Bailyn did the Atlantic world and, and kind of focused on that. People have done the Caribbean, and people are starting to do the Pacific, but, this whole, going from the Atlantic to, under Africa is, I think, just kind of a realization that I think will probably push some people to to other interesting speculations.
Well, if you want bookends for all of it, Simon Winchester has a book called The Atlantic. He has another one on the Pacific, and then he has one about the land in between.
Yeah, I'll look at that.
So you get all three, or bits and pieces of all three.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and on that, I will also order Myth America and start listening and reading and putting something into Obsidian. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Have a good
Appreciate
week.
it, Dan.
See ya.
You too.